Okay, let's unpack this. When we analyze power and systemic inequality, um, we often assume that we just have to follow the money, that greed and wealth are the only primary drivers. But what if the most enduring and effective tools of a ruling class aren't monetary at all? What if they're purely psychological?
That is the highly provocative claim at the heart of our deep dive today.
Mhm.
We are working with source material that focuses entirely on this invisible, non-monetary hold that power structures exert on individuals.
Mm.
The source refers to this phenomenon specifically as the psychic benefits of systems like white supremacy.
Right. So our mission is pretty straightforward. We're examining the materials claim that social status and approval matter far more than economic benefits to many individuals. We need to extract the key arguments, the surprising historical context, and, crucially, how the elite strategically use this psychological dynamic. Well, to secure auxiliary support without having to open their wallets.
What's fascinating here is the core assertion that for a significant portion of the population, social status, or the perception of relative importance, carries a lot more weight than what's actually in a bank account. We are talking about psychological payoffs that, for some, really do trump tangible material benefits.
So let's define this concept precisely as the source does. By psychic benefits, the material is referring to the non-economic value derived from relative social standing, specifically the feeling of being better than a designated outgroup. The source suggests that succumbing to this is, well, a form of mental enslavement, where the system successfully brands itself as the only road to importance.
Yeah, and to illustrate the sheer power of this psychological grip, the source brings up the analogy of the $40 million slaves. It's
Yeah.
referring to black athletes and entertainers. Now, these individuals have achieved significant financial independence and security, right? Yet the material argues they often show themselves to be slavishly dependent on the approval of white society. This dependency, according to the source, demonstrates that the psychic hold can be stronger than material reality, even when vast wealth is present. It's quite a claim.
And this dependency serves a huge function for those in power. I mean, no ruling elite can maintain long-term control using only their small group. They need foot soldiers.
Operatives, auxiliaries.
Right, or what the source calls operatives, auxiliaries, and buffer groups. The elite simply lack the numbers to do the dirty work themselves.
Exactly. They need others to be crash dummies, basically, to take the risks and handle the enforcement side of things. And this is precisely where cheap psychic benefits become the most valuable tool for the elite. If you can buy off critical auxiliary support with status and approval rather than expensive, empowering financial benefits, well, the cost to the central power structure is effectively zero.
It makes perfect sense from that perspective, and the source argues this isn't some new strategy. It connects this reliance on cheaply paid auxiliaries right back to European feudalism.
Uh-huh. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the material paints a rather unflattering portrait of the medieval kings, often described as, weak, diseased, or even insane due to habitual genetic defects or incest. These monarchs couldn't rule by force alone, particularly outside their own fortifications. They just didn't have the reach.
And so they hired groups of thugs, is the term used, called the palace guard, to enforce the extraction of goods and money from the serfs. The serfs, who were being exploited, were offered a pretty low-stakes benefit in exchange for their compliance.
Mhm.
Essentially, you won't be killed. That was the baseline agreement.
Yeah, stay in line and you get to live. What's fascinating here is how the source links this domestic use of auxiliaries to global expansion. The feudal system was built on using people as tools, right? And when Europe began its genocidal expansion, as the source puts it, they simply repurposed the cheapest tools they had.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. The source argues that the first people sent out as colonists were their own undesirables, the flotsam and jetsam of feudal Europe. This group included criminals, debtors, political dissenters, religious heretics, people they wanted out of the way, expendable, basically.
And critically, the material emphasizes a technological shift that made this expansion successful: gunpowder. This is a key point in the source.
Yeah.
The source claims that before gunpowder became ubiquitous, Europeans lost virtually every fight they tried to wage outside of Europe. Gunpowder changed the military and political calculus entirely.
Wow. Consequently, the source notes that certain strains of white supremacists have developed this near religious fixation on firearms. According to the material, it holds a spiritual place in their psychological cosmology because gunpowder was the only thing that physically allowed them to leave the continent and not have to, immediately turn back.
It provided the ultimate physical security for their expansionist auxiliary force. It let them project power in a way they couldn't before.
Okay, so now let's look at the actual payoff offered to these undesirables who risked their lives becoming colonists. What were they getting?
Well, the source identifies the primary psychological reward as simple, maybe even crude, being told they're special and better than the indigenous population or the group they were being sent to conquer or displace.
Just feeling superior.
Exactly, that feeling.
And the system ensures that this false sense of superiority is constantly maintained, especially for incoming groups. The source suggests the system needs a permanent underclass. This ensures that even someone who, quote, just stepped off a boat yesterday and has no accomplishments can be sold the lie that they are superior to someone. That perceived relative status is the immediate, cheap psychic payoff.
But this raises an important question, doesn't it? Why would anyone go along with this when the material benefits are often so meager or even non-existent?
Well, the source highlights what it calls the profound wisdom in a quote attributed to Lyndon Johnson. Now, he's quoted as saying, "If you can convince the lowest white man that he's better than the richest black man, then you won't have to steal his money. He'll gladly give you every penny he's got."
That's a powerful quote, and it really cuts to the heart of the source's argument.
That analysis perfectly captures the elite's calculus, according to the source. If you can maintain power by simply providing psychological masturbation, why would you ever revert to providing expensive, empowering, tangible benefits? The source sums it up pretty ruthlessly, asking, why pay for the cow when you can keep milking that here for free?
Okay, but this is where we might engage critically for a moment. While the source claims the cost is zero, doesn't maintaining this psychological infrastructure, media, the rhetoric, the enforcement, doesn't that require constant effort and resources from the elite? I mean, it must require active management to keep that status hierarchy rigid, surely. It can't be entirely free.
That's a fair point. The source seems to address that by arguing the costs are absorbed through political maneuvers, which it frames as being cheaper than actual economic redistribution. And we see this calculus playing out, according to the source's interpretation, in recent political events, specifically its analysis of high-profile political pardons.
Right. The source zeroes in on specific examples interpreted as plays to restore psychic order. The material notes that Tucker Carlson publicly demanded the pardon of Daniel Perry.
He's the one convicted of murdering a BLM activist in Texas.
Correct. Carlson urged the governor to pardon Perry, specifically to send the right kind of racial message, according to the source's reading.
And Carlson's message, as interpreted by the source, was that overturning the lawful conviction was necessary to show that the white right isn't going to let any race soldiers rot in prison. It's about sending a signal to the base.
And then Ben Shapiro quickly followed suit, publicly demanding that Trump pardon Derek Chauvin, citing, again, according to the source, the same kind of motivation. The source interprets these demands as an attempt by these figures to undo what they perceived as political defeats for the white right following the 2020 uprisings. The tangible legal outcome mattered less, perhaps, than restoring the psychological sense of unchallenged authority for their auxiliary base.
So let's shift to the contemporary players who, according to the source, traffic in these psychic benefits. The material offers a, quite surprising analysis of recent shifts in rhetoric by figures like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens. The source claims their change in tune is not a change in heart regarding what the source calls their previous anti-lack filth.
No, definitely not a change of heart in this view. The material attributes the shift to a couple of things. One, a generational change. The baby boomer generation, who were perhaps the most religiously aspirational, are aging out. They're being replaced by Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z, who the source claims are just built different and maybe less susceptible to the old appeals.
Interesting. And the other motivator mentioned?
Money abroad. Plain and simple. The source claims that Tucker Carlson, for instance, is attempting to position himself in Middle Eastern financial affairs, recognizing that the low-hanging fruit for his previous political hustle in the U.S. is becoming less profitable.
So when the profit motive shifts, the psychic messaging changes too. Is that the idea?
That's exactly the argument presented, which highlights the absolute ruthlessness of the elite, as portrayed by the source, in managing their tools. Take the Charlie Kirk example, which the source describes as a convenient tool and empty vessel. The system expected total devotion.
And the moment Kirk proved even marginally defective, that's the source's phrasing, by trying to tiptoe away from slavish devotion to his backers on just one specific issue. The source notes his financial backers were fully willing to cut him off and find someone more reliable. Just like that.
Wow. So the moment the tool shows even a hint of independence, the cheap psychic benefits, the attention, the status, the validation, are immediately revoked.
That's the interpretation. The source also analyzes the fail-safe mechanism inherent in this system, attributing the perspective to Neely Fuller. It's quite clever, anyway.
How so?
Well, if the elite can subjugate a group, that is immediately taken as proof of superiority, right? It validates the psychic benefits given to the auxiliaries.
Yeah, it makes sense.
But if they can't overcome a group, if a group is too difficult to crack, the narrative simply shifts. Instead of admitting failure or equality, they just call the opposition animals, subhumans, or savages.
Ah, so either way, the supposed superiority, which is the actual psychic payoff, is always maintained. Heads I win, tails you lose kind of thing.
Precisely. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? The source is very clear in its synthesis. Psychic benefits are ultimately as bogus as an IOU. They're not real currency. The material suggests there is a rising demand from these auxiliary groups, not for more psychological approval, but for tangible, real benefits, something they can finally put in their bank account. A shift towards material demands.
And the source argues that these figures who exclusively traffic in the status game are the very reason the country is so polarized. They force every political discussion into an all-or-nothing confrontation because status is all or nothing. So here's the final provocative thought from the material. Consider that if you look at a figure that the source defines as, say, an anti-black racist differently, simply because their rhetoric momentarily aligns with yours on one single unrelated issue, you might be falling for the psychic benefit yourself. You might be giving them real attention and real credibility in exchange for what the source calls phony lip service.
That's definitely something to mull over, weighing the true value of social status against, well, material reality and consistent principles.